When my wife suggested that we do a podcast about hats, I thought, what an excellent idea. I'll do that at the drop of a hat. And I take my hat off to her for suggesting it. In today's podcast, you'll learn all about hat vocabulary and idioms. Welcome to
Aprender Inglés with Reza and Craig.
Hello and welcome, especially if you're a new listener to the podcast. My name's Craig.
And my name's Reza.
And with more than 50 years of teaching between us, we'll help you improve your English and take it up to the next level. How are you, Reza?
I'm doing very well, thank you. I was a bit tired. I must be getting old. I recorded the previous podcast standing up. Now I'm sitting down and I feel a bit better.
I can just about see you over the top of your microphone. You're looking very well. First this week, we have a voice message from Cesar.
Hi, interesting Craig. My name is Cesar, and I have one dub. This dub is when in your podcast you teach English with accent American or accent British. I have this dub.
Thank you, Cesar, and I apologize for mispronouncing your name. It's actually Cesar with a hard S and not a Cesar with a soft C there. So I apologize for that, Cesar. Reza, any comments about the message?
Well, when you say, do you teach English? I'm not, maybe you mean in the podcast. I presume you mean what we use in the podcast, but it could be for my classes as well. An English or an American accent? I use neither myself. I use a hybrid accent, which is mostly kind of Northern Irish, I would say. So neither English or American for me. Maybe by English you mean British. I guess I have a type of British accent, because Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland are also part of the United Kingdom. So for me, I would say my accent is kind of Northern Irish, Belfast, with a bit of a mixture. It's not kind of a pure accent. What would you say about your accent, Craig?
Well, I am English. I'm from England, from London, and I definitely speak English with an English accent, although when I teach, I do try to obviously explain American vocabulary, but I don't say that vocabulary with an American accent. So definitely an English accent for me. A couple of things, Cesar, with your message. Be careful of the pronunciation of doubt, because it has a silent letter. There's a silent B in doubt, D-O-U-B-T, but we don't pronounce it, so it's doubt. I have a doubt. Can you help me with this doubt? And another thing I noticed, you asked a question, but it sounded like a statement. You said, you teach English with, you said accent American. You need to change the order. It's American accent. So you teach English with an American accent, but that's not actually a question, even though you raise your voice at the end with intonation and say, you teach English with an American accent? That's a statement, that's not a question. You need to use the word do, the auxiliary verb do. So do you teach English with an American accent? Would be the correct question.
And Cesar, I would say to you, it's good to notice these things, but I wouldn't worry about it too much. It's no big deal. It's no problem at all whether you use an American accent or an English or Australian or South African, whatever. As long as your pronunciation is good, the accent doesn't really matter.
Next, we have a voice message from Stephanie from Madrid, one of my favorite names because that's also the name of my sister.
Hi, Craig and Reza. I just discovered your podcast. I listened to the phrasal verb, History of Phrasal Verbs, number 331, I think. And I am immediately recommending this to a number of my students. This is Stephanie. I'm speaking to you from Madrid, where I have been teaching English for almost 14 years. And I thought that your answers to the voice messages were really good, and also your description of phrasal verb history. I would have added, though, to the young woman who said she didn't speak in the type of grammar that she has learned, I would have added that to your advice, which was excellent also, that nobody speaks in that kind of grammar. It's extremely formal, and I think we study grammar to give us a common vocabulary to speak about mistakes. And advanced grammar, or any grammar, is much more useful in reading and in writing. Speaking, the most difficult thing is trying to say exactly what you want to say. And for people with a much lower level or beginning learning English, I think they should strive for clarity over complete accuracy. Now, when they get to upper intermediate, advanced levels, accuracy is more important, but
Thank you for your message, Stephanie. Unfortunately, you got cut off there because we only have the free version of the SpeakPipe app, so it's 90 seconds and we missed the end of your message. But I think we got the gist, the idea of what you were saying. And for Cesar, who sent us the message earlier, if you want an example of American accent, well, that's Stephanie. She says she's from Madrid, but I suspect that she spent a long time in North America. Any comments, Reza?
Yes, thank you very much for your message, Stephanie. So, Cesar, that was a good example of not only an American accent, but perfect pronunciation and perfect grammar as well. And speaking of grammar, it was interesting what Stephanie said, that we shouldn't become too obsessed with overly correct grammar, particularly speaking informally. I would go along with what she said about clarity over accuracy always being the key, although it is important to be accurate, but clarity must always be the number one objective in any form of communication, I think.
Yeah, I also agree 100% with Stephanie, focusing on clarity, focusing on being an effective speaker and fluency, which is one of the reasons I started the conversation courses that I run online, because I know many students have studied a lot of grammar in the past. They've attended these English classes where grammar seems to be the central focus. And I just wanted an opportunity for students to be able to speak and express themselves and become more fluent and more confident with their spoken English. So if you're interested in joining one of these groups, just send me an email, Craig, CRAIG, @inglespodcast.com, and I'll send information on those courses. Also, the episode that Stephanie was referring to, where we had some feedback from students, that was the episode on phrasal verbs, a brief history of phrasal verbs. Go to inglespodcast.com/331 to listen to that episode.
Okay, Craig, shall we get down to our main topic for today's episode?
Yes, let's take our hats off and get down to it.
Relax, take it easy.
Reza, how many hats do you own? How many hats do you have, do you think?
Right. I rarely wear hats, but how many do I own? That's a different question. Let me think. Not many. Maybe about 4 hats in total.
About the same for me. I think I might have 5, and I have one hat that I only wear once a year. Any idea what that could be?
Let's think. A hat that you would only wear once a year. For a special occasion?
Yes. A holiday, you could say. In December.
In December? A hat you wear?
Christmas hat.
A Christmas, of course. A Christmas hat, of course, yeah.
Yeah.
Are you talking about one of those silly things made out of paper or something like that?
No, not the ones you get in the Christmas crackers that British people love to pull, but it's a hat that I inherited from my brother-in-law. And it's, well, we'll look at the names of hats in this episode, but it's actually a red trilby with some Christmas decorations. And I like to wear it because it reminds me of him and spending Christmases with him before he died, unfortunately.
I don't believe I've ever seen you in that hat. I'd like to see that someday.
Well, you're never here at Christmas. You're always traveling or visiting your family. So if we ever spend a Christmas together, I promise you I will wear my Christmas hat.
Or please, if we can't, send me a photo. I want to see you in that fat.
And that fat?
No, you're not.
I am fat.
You're not fat. I want to see you in that hat. If it can't be in person, a photo, please.
You want to see a fat man in a hat? I'll tell you what, why don't we take a photo of me in that hat and you wearing another hat I have, and we'll include it in the show notes to this episode. Does that sound good?
Good idea.
And it's inglespodcast.com/538. Now, let's look at some vocabulary connected to hats. There is a brim of a hat, B-R-I-M, the brim. The brim of the hat is the bit that comes out, the projecting part or the edge that extends outward from the base of the top part of the hat. And the top part of the hat is often called the crown, the same word that would be on the head of a king or a queen. So the crown of the hat is on the top of the head and the brim goes out from the crown.
And of course, a crown can also be a type of hat. So apart from being a part of a hat, a king or a queen can wear a crown.
Exactly. It also goes on the head. Exactly. Now, the brim can give you shade and protection from the sun. And it also changes in how wide it is and the style depending on the type of hat. So you can have a hat with a wide brim or a hat with a narrow brim. So let's look at different types of hats. Reza, what's the first one on the list?
Well, the first one is a word which you might not be familiar with, but it is a fairly common hat, a fedora. So it's spelled F-E-D-O-R-A. I've no idea how you say it in Spanish. Who knows? It might even be the same word. I don't know. It sounds like a word which is from a foreign language originally. It doesn't sound English originally, does it?
No.
But it has become an English word. A fedora is a soft hat and it's made of felt. F-E-L-T. Now, I know felt can be the past of felt, but it's also a type of material used for making hats and other things, a soft material. And it has a slightly curled brim. The brim is not flat. It has a little bit of a curl to it. When I think of someone famous in a fedora, I think Frank Sinatra.
Well, I have Frank Sinatra here as wearing a trilby more than a fedora.
You may be right, yeah.
I think a fedora has a wider brim. I think more of Humphrey Bogart.
Right.
If you think of films like Casablanca or The Maltese Falcon, he wore fedoras in those films. Justin Timberlake, do you know who he is? He often wears a fedora. Johnny Depp has worn them quite famously. Brad Pitt as well sometimes wears a fedora.
I think you're right, yeah. Maybe Frank Sinatra was more of a trilby wearer.
Our next hat is a bowler hat, B-O-W-L-E-R. Just think of Charlie Chaplin. He wore a bowler hat, and not so much these days, but back in the, 50s, 60s in London, businessmen carried a black umbrella, a briefcase, and they wore bowler hats. It's a hard hat, again made of felt, that material that Reza described, and it has a rounded top or rounded crown.
I guess it's called a bowler because it looks a little bit like a bowl, a round bowl. Mm-hmm. I'm imagining that.
Yeah.
South American listeners, some of you might be very familiar with them. It is, these days, part of the traditional indigenous clothes of Bolivian women.
Oh, yes.
It's a very strange thing that should be the case. I did a little bit of internet research. Apparently, the tradition started around about 1900. So it's been the case for about 130 years. Before that, indigenous Bolivian women didn't wear those hats, but they liked them so much, whenever British railroad workers came over and started wearing them. They really loved their bowler hats, and they adopted the tradition, and it's been part of Bolivian culture ever since. And it is now the traditional headwear of Bolivian women. Curious. Not Bolivian men, Bolivian women only.
That's very interesting. I had no idea. Now that you say it, now that you mention it, I have seen pictures of Bolivian women wearing bowler hats. Yeah. Our next word is beret. Now, that looks like a French word. I'm guessing it is. It might be pronounced beret in some languages, but we don't pronounce the T normally in English. Beret. And it's a round, flat hat. A flat hat. Try saying that 10 times quickly. A flat hat, typically worn tilted to one side, so at an angle on the side. Very commonly worn by soldiers in the army, for example. And there's a stereotype of French men wearing berets. I've seen men wearing berets in the Basque Country, in the Spanish side of the Pyrenees and also the French side. So in the Basque Country, it's quite a typical hat to wear.
Yes, and I've also seen some men wearing them outside the Basque Country. I think above all, they're prevalent there, but generally in the north of Spain, quite a lot of men, particularly older men, used to wear a beret. I associate it with older men in the countryside, and particularly the Basque Country, but other parts of Spain, I've seen them as well. So for me, it's just as Spanish as it is French. But for some reason in English, we've taken the French word, beret. I know in Spanish it's boina, but we've decided to call it beret in French.
Next is a Spanish word on the list, sombrero. And I do have a sombrero. And if Reza agrees, he will wear one in the photograph that we're going to take after this podcast. It's a wide-brimmed hat from Mexico. Do you remember brim? Yeah, so wide-brimmed becomes the adjective to describe the hat. It's a wide-brimmed hat from Mexico. And I know you are a big fan of mariachi bands, Reza. So if you imagine the mariachi band wearing traditional sombreros, and you like the music, don't you?
I do. I don't mind mariachi music.
I like it too.
It's good fun. Sombrero is a good example of one of those words which has got into another language, but not exactly ended up where it should have.
What do you mean by that?
Because as all our Spanish-speaking listeners know, the Spanish word for a hat is
sombrero.
Yeah, but in English, it's a very specific type of hat.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yes.
Yeah, so the Spanish word for hat could be a beret, could be a bowler, could be a fedora, could be whatever is sombrero. But in English, a sombrero is a specific type of hat from Mexico. Not all hats. That's the confusion with the word sombrero.
Another hat that I have and I wear whenever I go to visit the UK and it's very cold is a woolly hat. Wool is material from sheep and woolly is the adjective describing the hat. So it's a woolly hat that keeps your head warm in the winter. It's a close-fitting hat. Sometimes it has a round woolen ball on top. That's called a bobble, B-O-B-B-L-E. And my favorite woolly hat is one I bought many years ago with the New Zealand All Blacks on it. And I absolutely love that woolly hat. In American English, it's commonly called a beanie, B-E-A-N-I-E. Do you have a woolly hat or a beanie?
I think I have one, but I virtually never wear it. It would have to be extremely cold for me to wear one.
Well, you go to Belfast in the winter sometimes.
It's not even cold enough there most of the time. I would rather wear another type of hat to keep me warm because I find that woolly hats are really warm. And in fact, one thing which always makes me, the word is uncomfortable. Yeah, I'm going to use the word uncomfortable, is when I see other people wear a woolly hat on a hot day. It bothers me. I feel uncomfortable. I think, why? How can you keep that on your head at 38 degrees? But I've seen people do it, quite a lot of people, quite often. I know it's typical of certain cultures, and also other people just like it. I think, how can you wear that? It's 38 degrees. Why would you want something really close to your head, made out of wool at 38 degrees? But hey, go and spend a day in Morocco and you'll see it. I can't get my head around it. Pardon the pun. It makes me feel uncomfortable just to see it.
Yeah, I feel a similar way in the winter when I see men wearing shorts or women wearing short skirts and their legs are blue from the cold. Oh, why are you doing this? And it makes me feel cold.
Now that you can see in Belfast a lot.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure. Especially on a Saturday night.
Yeah. Or Newcastle, I believe.
A hat that I'm sure, well, I'm not sure, but I'm guessing you've never worn is a top hat. What's that?
Thankfully, I've never been forced to wear one, but occasionally some men are. It's a tall hat. It's flat at the top. So remember that the top is called a crown. So we could say it's a flat-crowned hat, and it's tall. And it's worn occasionally for very special occasions, very, very formal, very special occasions. It used to be worn quite often at weddings. It's not so common now, but occasionally. And you think of magicians as always having a top hat. And as Craig said right at the beginning of the podcast, you would think of the rabbit being pulled out of the magician's hat, and it will probably be a top hat. That's when the magician keeps his rabbit. Also, the dancer Fred Astaire. Yeah, think of him dancing away, Fred Astaire. He always had a hat and a cane, right? A hat and a cane.
Yeah.
And the hat was a top hat.
I'm putting on my top hat. Yeah, my tails. The next word, or the next hat, comes from the United States. It's a baseball cap from the sport of baseball. And if you've watched a game of baseball, you might see the players, the baseball players, with a soft cap with a rounded top or crown and a stiff front, which often protects their eyes from the sun. So they pull the baseball cap down over their eyes and it protects them from the sun. Reza, would you ever wear, well, first of all, do you have a baseball cap? And if you do, would you ever wear it back to front, which means the stiff, long part at the back?
I think I do have a baseball cap somewhere, and it's purely to keep the sun out of my eyes. I don't wear it as a fashion statement, and it has no connection with baseball, although originally that's what they were used for. No, I would never wear it back to front because I simply don't consider myself cool enough to do that.
Me neither.
So I wouldn't do it.
I actually think people look silly when they wear it back to front. I can think of two situations in which I'd wear, and I do have a couple of baseball caps. One, if I was walking along on a very, very hot day and my neck was being burned by the sun, you can turn it round and use the stiff front to protect your neck. Or if I'm on a motorbike, because sometimes the wind lifts the cap up and it will blow off in the wind. So if you wear it back to front, you keep your hat on.
That's a good point, yeah. Getting back to the sun on the back of your neck, though, the ideal hat for that was those hats with a bit added that the Japanese army used in the Second World War. They had it cracked there, didn't it? They knew how to keep the sun off the back. You know those hats I'm talking about?
Or Lawrence of Arabia. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
In the desert. The next hat is a hat we've already mentioned, the trilby, Trilby, which is a narrow-brimmed hat, a hat with a narrow brim. And as we mentioned, Frank Sinatra is often photographed, he's dead now, was often photographed wearing trilbies. Michael Jackson on stage would sometimes wear a trilby. And I think in one or two films of James Bond with Sean Connery, I think he used to wear a trilby, didn't he?
Yes, that's true, yeah. Now, the next hat you would think comes from Panama because it's called a Panama hat. But you'd be wrong. It's from Ecuador, believe it or not. So someone got confused along the line somewhere, a bit like the word sombrero in English being a very specific type of hat when really it means all hats. So the Panama hat was invented in Ecuador, and it's a light hat. It's a breathable hat. That means air will go through it because traditionally it's made from palm leaves. So
like from a palm tree.
From a palm tree, exactly. So it keeps the sun off you, but it lets your body breathe. The air goes in and out. So obviously it's ideal for very, very hot, sunny countries where you don't want a great weight on your head. Craig, I'm trying to think, what was the hat that Indiana Jones wore? Was it a fedora? Was it a Panama? Is that a Panama?
Oh, that's a good question.
Or a kind of mixture?
I think it was a fedora, but maybe if I've misspoken, maybe we can be corrected by people listening. I think it was a fedora, but we need to check that. And if we're wrong, we will apologize in a future podcast. I'm sure we'll get some feedback if it wasn't a fedora. In the UK, there's a snack or type of food called a pork pie. A pie with pastry, and it has traditionally pork or some kind of meat inside. I think it's meat. It could be something from an animal, hopefully. But there's also a hat called a pork pie hat, which has a flat top or crown and a very short brim. And if you think of a jazz musician, this very cool guy on stage with his saxophone or his clarinet, well, he's possibly wearing a pork pie hat as he's playing. Very cool.
Yeah, it's very jazzy, isn't it? It's a very jazzy hat. Yeah. And what about the group Madness? Did they wear pork pie hats?
They did.
Or trilbies? Was it pork pies?
I think pork pie hats. Yeah. Very well remembered. That takes me back to the 1980s.
I am a big fan of Madness. Yeah, they always wore the pork pie hats.
What's a cowboy? Well, cowboy hat's obvious, isn't it?
Well, it's obvious in the sense that it was designed for cowboys, not just in America, as many listeners in South America know. Plenty of people wear cowboy hats there as well. So that's a wide brimmed hat, but it's not like a Panama hat. It's definitely heavier. Yeah, it's a more kind of sturdy, solid hat, and it has a higher top. Think of any cowboy film. That's the hat, a cowboy hat.
And there's an expression I really like from Texas when you want to speak about somebody who is very boastful. They're always saying about how much money they have, how big their house is, and how good they are and how rich they are. What they could say in Texas is, oh, this guy, he's all hat and no cattle, which means he's got the talk, he's talking, his hat's very big, but really he doesn't have a lot of cattle, which means he doesn't have any substance to him. I really like that expression. All hat and no cattle. Reza, what's a fez?
It's a hat which I haven't seen much in real life, and I've been in Morocco in a city called Fez, and I don't think I saw one. It's a flat-topped conical hat. So it's that hat you associate with North Africa, possibly Egypt, maybe even as far as Turkey, that kind of area, you know. So
they're often red, aren't they?
They're often red, not always, but often. And quite often they have something which is kind of like a little piece of rope at the top, which kind of moves around a little bit, sways when they walk, right?
Yeah, I might call that a tassel, Tassle, a tassel.
That's the word. So
not a bobble, but a tassel.
And bubbles on the beanie, right?
Yeah.
So I wonder, I don't know, were they invented in Fez? I don't know. I've been in Fez, and I didn't see anybody wearing a fez, I have to say. I think maybe they might have 100 years ago, but it's not so common now, would you say?
Yeah, probably. But we have to be careful because we know the Panama hat doesn't come from Panama.
Right.
Next on the list is a turban, Turban, which is a long cloth wrapped around the head. And Sikhs often wear turbans. Sikhs, Sikhs, a group of people from the north of India. And I did a bit of research on the internet, and not only are turbans worn by Sikhs, but there's a group of Muslims called Imama who wear turbans, and some Hindu monks wear turbans, and also the Tuareg people. They are a Berber ethnic group in the Sahara. They also wear turbans, and I had no idea that turbans were worn in so many different places.
Yeah, Although if someone from the Indian subcontinent is wearing a turban, 80% possibility they're going to be a Sikh.
There's also the subject of cultural appropriation. Have you heard of that expression? Where people who wear their hair in a particular way, maybe white people who wear dreadlocks or have their hair in a way that is from an ethnic group, they're criticized because it's not their culture. In a similar way, Beyonce was accused of cultural appropriation because she wore turbans as a fashion statement. What do you think of that?
I don't see any harm in her wearing a turban myself. But then again, I'm not a Sikh. Perhaps some fundamentalist Sikhs, very religious Sikh people might be offended, but it doesn't bother me.
No, me neither.
There is one thing that I can see may have bothered fundamentalist Sikhs, but not me. And it's quite interesting. This episode's all about hats. When do we wear hats? Well, many occasions, or headwear in general, very often as a sign of respect. For example, at a wedding, formal occasion, people used to wear hats in churches. At a funeral, as the dead body goes past, you take off your hat.
Yeah, when do we take them off as well? Yeah.
Hats are often associated with respect, and you wear them, and a soldier should have his hat on. Apparently, you can't salute if you're not wearing your hat. Mm-hmm. You can be in full uniform, but if you don't have your hat on, you shouldn't salute. You only salute with your hat on. Sikhism is the only religion I know of in the world where men cover their hair, but not women. The whole point of a turban is that a Sikh man, if he's a strict practicing Sikh, will in public always cover his hair. Not in private, just in public. Just like many fundamentalist Muslim societies insist that women cover their hair in public, but not men. Strangely, for Sikhs, it's men who must cover their hair. Women, no. Women can reveal their hair in Sikh society in public. It's men. It's curious, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
The only religion where men have to cover their hair in public, but not women. It's a strange one.
It's interesting. There was also some controversy a few years ago with helmets, wearing helmets in the UK, because Sikhs have a turban and have a lot of hair under their turban. Then they asked to be exempt from wearing helmets, which is a law if you ride a motorcycle in the UK. You need that protective head covering, which is a helmet. Helmets can also have visors at the front. Sometimes visors just have no top because they're protecting you against the sun. That's also a visor. And helmets, of course, not only worn by people riding motorbikes, but also cyclists, builders, climbers, anyone in doing a dangerous activity, and people working on building sites commonly wear helmets to protect themselves. What's a bonnet, Reza?
A part of a car.
As well as
a hat. Okay. There's two uses of the word bonnet. In British English, the bonnet is the front bit of a car, the bit that the Americans call the hood. And funnily enough, a hood is something you put over your head. Funny how language works, eh?
Yeah.
But we're talking about a bonnet that you put over your head, but it's not a hood. I'm confusing you, aren't I? B-O-N-N-E-T, bonnet, is a hat which is tied under the chin. That's right. It has something like a ribbon or something similar, a piece of lace, and you actually tie it, you put the two ends together under your chin so that the wind doesn't blow it off. It's sometimes seen on babies to keep the sun off them, keep the wind off as well, I suppose. And as far as I'm concerned, it's absolutely iconic of any Jane Austen female character. They have to have a bonnet.
Absolutely. Also in old Western movies with cowboys, you sometimes see ladies wearing bonnets walking through the town in the Midwest. And do you remember the Little House on the Prairie?
Oh yes, yeah.
They wore bonnets, didn't they, the ladies?
Yeah. What do you think? Will bonnets make a comeback in the 21st century? Can you see any ladies, any women wearing bonnets as a fashion statement these days?
Maybe if Beyonce decided to wear one, it would catch on and become popular. Who knows? Speaking of famous people wearing hats, another famous person, Sherlock Holmes, commonly wore a deerstalker hat. D-E-R-R, like the animal, deer, and stalker, S-T-A-L-K-E-R. S-T-A-L-K-E-R. To stalk is to go and look for animals. And it's also something animals do. Animals stalk their prey. And if you're a hunter, you might stalk the animal you're going to shoot. So associated with hunting and stalking is the deer stalker, which has a brim at the front and also the back of the hat. And on both sides of the hat, there is a flap, a piece of material that you can lower to cover your ears if you're cold, or you can tie up and attach to the top of the hat. So just think of Sherlock Holmes in many films and pictures. He's wearing a deer stalker.
And our last type of hat is similar to a deer stalker, but not exactly the same. It's a trapper hat. A trapper, T-R-A-P-P-E-R, a trapper hat is a warm hat, yeah, so it's to be used in cold countries usually, or cold places. And it also has flaps which cover the ears, similar to a deer stalker. However, it doesn't have the brim at the front and back. Usually it has a short brim at the front, but it definitely doesn't have a brim at the back. So it doesn't look exactly the same as a deer stalker. Also, the brim at the front sometimes can be folded up. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. It depends on the particular version. So they're very common in cold places like Canada, also the northern United States in winter, and Russia. That's where we think of above all. And it's typical to wear one, especially if you go ice fishing. Think of the typical kind of things that you can do. There are not many things you can do in the winter in Canada and Russia. You might go ice fishing. You'll need a very warm hat for that. A trapper hat is the hat for you.
Exactly. And there are, of course, many more different kinds of hats, but I think here we've covered the most popular. Again, if you want to see a list of these hats, go to inglespodcast.com/538. And I take my hat off to you, Reza, for giving such excellent descriptions. If you take your hat off to someone, that means you show them respect and admiration. Reza, I take my hat off to you for your podcasting skills.
Craig, do you think you would look good we've already spoken about wearing a baseball cap the wrong way around. What about in a serious hat, like a fedora or a trilby or something like that? Do you think you'd look good in one of those?
No, I'd look absolutely terrible because I'm too short.
Oh.
I'm 5'7", 5'8", more or less. So that's about 172 centimeters tall. And I think those kind of hats, the serious hats, they look good on tall people, in my opinion. I think if you're short like me, it just looks silly. Think of Danny DeVito wearing hats. I don't think it suits short people. What's your opinion?
Do you know what? I'd never thought of that, but you've got me thinking. And yes, hats just generally look better on tall people. You're right, they do. It must be something to do with the angle, the fact that they're above you, so you're looking at the brim from underneath. Whereas with Danny DeVito, you're looking at the brim from above.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably something I hadn't thought about it, but I'm sure you've got a very good point there. Same for me, I'm not particularly tall. I'm kind of average height, and I just don't think I generally would look good in it. I think it's the shape of my face, a head, or something. It just doesn't look good. No, I don't think I'd look good in any hat, to be honest.
Me neither. Maybe the hats that beekeepers use where you wouldn't see my face. That would be the best hat for me. Reza and I do many things. Reza's an English teacher. He's also a famous podcaster and a Cambridge examiner. I edit audio and I also teach online. We wear many hats, which means we have different roles or responsibilities. If you work in a company and you happen to be the social media person and the marketer and the salesperson, if you do different tasks, you can say you wear many hats. And at the moment, we have our podcasting hat on, even though physically we're not wearing a hat. So that's an idiom, which means you do different things.
Craig, playing any sport, have you ever scored a hat trick?
maybe when I was a kid at school playing football many years ago. If you score a hat trick, that means you have done something 3 times in a row consecutively. And it's often used in sports like ice hockey or field hockey or football. To score a hat trick is to score 3 goals.
Craig, I've accidentally ordered online too much chocolate. It's very warm. It's going to melt, beg your pardon. What am I going to do with it? I need to eat this chocolate quickly. Will you help me?
At the drop of a hat.
I thought so.
At the drop of a hat, you're not literally dropping a hat. It's an idiom. It means immediately, without hesitation. Reza, if a hat maker offered you 50,000 euros to wear their hat on this podcast, would you do it?
Yes, at the drop of a hat. Yeah, I can't imagine it happening, but I would for the money, sure.
Even though no one would actually see you because this is audio only.
Even better.
If something is old hat, that means it's familiar or maybe even old-fashioned, not in use anymore. A bit like my jokes. My silly jokes are old hat. Many people have heard them before.
Craig, there's something I want you to keep under your hat. If you go to your local supermarket after 8 o'clock, when they're clearing the shelves, they give out free chocolate. But first come, first served. First person to get there gets the chocolate. So don't tell too many people about it. Keep it under your hat.
Don't worry, I won't let the cat out of the bag. We had that idiom recently on the podcast. To keep something a secret, you keep it under your hat. You don't tell anyone about it. Don't worry, Reza, I will keep that under my hat. I won't tell anybody.
Now, Craig, you do many things, but I didn't realize until quite recently that you really know a hell of a lot about PA systems and that type of thing. It's a feather in your cap that I didn't know about. You know quite a lot about public address systems and things like that, don't you?
Yeah, I do. I know a little bit about it. It's another hat I wear. So I could say it's another feather in my cap. It's something I've achieved. It's something I'm proud of. Let's say as students, you pass a Cambridge exam. Oh, I've passed the C1 Advanced exam. You can say that's another feather in your cap. Just imagine it's like a little medal that you wear, another achievement that you have, another feather in your cap.
Or another example, just chosen completely at random. If after failing twice, the third time you pass a C1 Valencian exam, that would be a feather in your cap.
Which you also have.
For example, yeah.
Which you also have.
I chose that example purely at random. Yeah.
Congratulations, Reza. That's another feather in your cap. If you throw your hat in the ring, R-I-N-G, that means you announce your candidacy or your participation for something. So you're going to join something, participate in something. You're throwing your hat in the ring. Do you know where that comes from?
Let me guess that it's something to do with gambling.
Not quite, although nearly. It's boxing. It's from boxing because back in the 19th century, boxing rings used to be round. Of course, now they're square. So there was a round boxing ring. And if you wanted to challenge a boxer and say, yes, I'm going to fight you, you would throw your hat into the ring, or the boxing ring.
Literally.
Physically throw your hat, which means you're going to participate in the next fight. So that became the idiom. Now, these days, if you throw your hat in the ring, then you're going to announce that you're running for president or prime minister or something. I'll throw my hat in the ring, I'll join the race, or I'll join the competition.
Craig, have you ever worked at a company where someone was retiring and they perhaps wanted to buy them a present and they passed the hat?
Well, when I worked at the British Council, then many people retired and they passed the hat, and I put some money in the hat, although strangely when I left the British Council, the hat wasn't passed for me.
Right. Okay. Well, we're not talking about buying Craig a fedora or a trilby.
Not that I'm bitter or angry.
Oh, no,
Clearly
not.
It doesn't bother me.
Well, whenever we say pass the hat, we probably don't mean literally a hat, although maybe it could be. To pass the hat means to collect money from a group of people. So typically when someone retires or leaves a position and you want to buy them a present and you're a group of people, each person will pay a small amount. You collect the money. You could collect the money in a hat. That would be the traditional way to do it. Someone gives the hat out and people put a coin or a note in the hat. But of course you don't need to use a hat. But the expression has stayed with us. To pass the hat is to collect money from a group of people, to put it together to buy something, usually as a gift or a present or something like that.
An idiom we've had on the podcast before is mad as a hatter, or as mad as a hatter. Hatter, Hatter, a person who makes hats. And that idiom means to be really crazy or silly. Now, we have mentioned this before. Do you remember where it comes from?
Does it come from, it's a question for me of what came first, the chicken or the egg? Does it come from Alice in Wonderland, or did Alice in Wonderland use it because it already existed?
The second one. They used it because it already existed, because it comes from when hatters made hats from felt. Now, we mentioned felt at the beginning of the podcast, F-E-L-T, that material that children use sometimes when they're doing arts and crafts. And felt was made by turning animal fur, the fur is the hair of the animal, into felt. And to do this process, the hatters used mercury nitrate, which is poisonous. So working every day with this mercury made the hatters seem crazy because they said stupid things. It affected them mentally. They forgot things. They didn't know what they were saying. They started twitching and moving their body. So everybody thought the hatters were mad. But it was this chemical, this mercury, they were using to turn the animal fur into felt.
So that's where it comes from.
That's where it comes from.
Because like many British or Irish people, we know the expression from the famous book by Lewis Carroll, Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah, the Mad Hatter.
And one of the favorite characters is the Mad Hatter. And he's such a famous character that I was led to believe that that's where the expression comes from. But no, Lewis Carroll already knew that expression from before. That's interesting. Wow.
And we have 3 more idioms to share with you. To pull a rabbit out of a hat is something that magicians do when they're on stage. We mentioned the top hat from which the rabbit comes. But if you pull a rabbit out of the hat, using it as an idiom, you do something surprising or maybe something that seems impossible. For example, have you ever pulled a rabbit out of a hat during one of your English lessons?
Yeah, particularly when I was younger and wasn't so well prepared. I basically didn't have time to prepare a class, but I asked somebody a question and something unusual had happened to them. And I thought, oh, great, I'm going to base my lesson around what they said. That's like pulling a rabbit out of a hat. That's magic. Yeah. Without any preparation whatsoever, I'm now able to do the class. Phew, thank goodness for that.
Yeah, well done for pulling it out of the hat. Our next one is to hang up your hat. To hang up your hat as if you would hang up your coat when you go into a room. You hang your hat on the wall, on a hat stand, for example. And this, used as an idiom, means to settle in one place or maybe retire. And we can use the phrasal verb to settle down, to feel at home, to stay in one place. And I don't know if you remember, Reza, the song, Wherever I Lay My Hat, That's My Home. It's a similar idea. You lay your hat down somewhere, or you hang it up down somewhere, and that's where you feel at home. That's where you are at home. Marvin Gaye wrote that song, brilliant song. Paul Young also recorded it. Wherever I lay my hat, that's my home. I'm sorry about my voice. Wherever I lay my hat, that's my home. So it's just to settle in one place or to retire.
Craig, I got one more, which I know I could apply to myself. I often talk through my hat. Now, that doesn't mean I'm wearing a hat. It simply means that I'm talking about something without really understanding what I'm talking about. I do that in most podcasts, in fact, as listeners has probably noticed. I talk about something but don't really know what I'm talking about. Like hats, what do I know about hats? Not very much. I'm talking through my hat. I'm talking about it, but I don't really 100% understand it.
Well, I take my hat off to you because I think you've done it extremely well in this podcast. But now it's your turn, dear listener, to practice your English. We take our hats off to you for sending all your wonderful voice messages to us. Now, do you have a favourite hat? And if you do, is it on our list of hats? Why don't you practice the vocabulary in this podcast and send us a voice message? Are you a hat person? Tell us why and what hats you like. You can reach us by voice by going to speakpipe.com, speakpipe.com/Ingles podcast.
Or you could send us an email. You could write to Craig or me. The addresses are craig@inglespodcast.com or belfastreza@gmail.com.
And if you're a Spanish speaker and you want to study English for free or with paid resources, go to store.mentioningles.net. We'd like to thank our Patreon supporters, and we're passing the hat here because you're welcome to join our Patreon program. And by doing so, you get instant access to the transcriptions of this podcast so that you can read every word that we say. Go to patreon.com, patreon.com/Ingles podcast.
It would be nice to name every single Patreon supporter, but unfortunately we don't have time to do that. So, as usual, we will mention the name of our most recent supporters who've just joined us this month, and they are Guillermina Jover, Arancha, Maribel Rodriguez, Gerardo, Adrià Puig Cabrulla, Esther, Carmen de la Torre Palomo, Marina Perez Trigueros, Lily, Marta Busquets, Sue Chen, Denise, Salvador Prieto Villanueva, and Isabel M. Thank you very much to you and indeed all our sponsors.
Yes, thank you very, very much. Now, we don't know what we're going to speak about next week, so please send us your ideas via SpeakPipe if possible. And if we don't hear from anybody, then we'll have to pull a rabbit out of the hat and think of a topic ourselves. Until next time, thank you for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed it, please tell a friend so that more people can listen. And have a wonderful week. It's goodbye from Reza.
And bye-bye from Craig.
The music in this podcast is by Pitts. The track is called See You Later.